in collaboration with the Cyprus Mail. This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous on mycyradio.eu.
And coming up on this evening's programmes, the Euro elections and how you can register. We'll be talking to Amnesty International about their damning report yet again on Cyprus. UN Special Advisor Alexander Downer prepares to leave his post. And we'll talk about Prince Charles interfering, some say, in the slaughter of birds in Cyprus. Stay tuned. All EU citizens living as residents in Cyprus are legally entitled to vote in Cypriot local municipal elections and European parliamentary elections. But to do so, they must register, and what's more, they must register separately for each. The deadline for the upcoming European elections is April the 2nd, so you haven't got long. With me is the Assistant Chief Returning Officer for the elections, Dimitris Dimitriou. Dimitris, thanks very much for joining us. What is the main message you need to get across to non-Cypriot voters in particular? Because I know you have informed all the new voters over the age of 18, but a lot of EU nationals residing in Cyprus perhaps don't know what they need to do.
If any citizen of another EU country which is living in Cyprus wish to vote for the Cypriots MPs, should be registered in the special electoral rolls until the 2nd of April.
They do that where? At the district office or here
yes,
at the Interior
to the district offices and here in the Ministry of Interior.
Now, we had a considerable number, probably nearly 10% of voters, I think, last time round, who fell into this category. How many do you think are registered at the moment?
We have already registered 6,500 from Euro elections of 2009, and now we have approximately 500 new persons who are registered in this procedure.
So, reasonably considerable increase, though of course I suppose some of the people who were registered last time round have left. Now, in some European countries, they make it very easy for European citizens to vote simply by putting them automatically on the electoral register if they have a residential address in a country. Sweden, for example, is one of them.
For Euro elections, a citizen of another EU country can vote for the MPs of the country where he has his permanent residence, but also if his country legislation allows, can vote for the MPs of his native country.
But wouldn't it cut down a lot of the bureaucracy and paperwork just to say once people have got their yellow slip or whatever, they go automatically onto the register? It would save you an awful lot of trouble and paperwork, wouldn't it?
Yes. But I would like not to answer to this question. It's another a big thing, but I would like not to answer.
Okay. Let's move on to Cypriots abroad, because you are operating, I believe, some polling stations in Greece, in the UK, and I think in Belgium.
Yes.
What procedures are in place there? Because the response has been quite poor, hasn't it?
We made some announcements, and they should be registered if they like to vote in a polling station abroad. And until now, I can say that polling station will be established in Athens, Salonika, and in London.
Not in Belgium?
It's approximately near to have the polling station in Brussels.
And what about Turkish Cypriots? Because we've now got a slightly new situation, I think, as regards Turkish Cypriot voters. Can you run us through what is required of them if they wish to vote in the elections?
Turkish Cypriots who are living in the occupied areas are automatically registered in the special electoral roll if they have already issued the new identity card of the republic.
So they don't have to go and register as well?
Yes.
They do?
No.
So they can just come over with their current modern ID card,
the new ID card.
present that at the polling station, and they'll be on the list?
Yes.
And how many are we talking about here? There's a fairly considerable number.
It's about 60,000 people.
Who didn't vote at the last elections?
In last elections we have, I think, 1,300 Turkish Cypriots.
So that's a huge, huge difference, possibly, for the outcome of the elections.
If they like to come to vote, they can elect a Turkish Cypriot MP.
Yes, we do have a couple standing, I believe. Okay, so as you approach the elections, the main message is that it's only until the 2nd of April that people need to get this paperwork done. Now, I looked this morning on the Ministry of the Interior's website, because I had read in the paper that you'd have something online there in English, Turkish and Greek, but I couldn't find anything in English.
No, we have a site for Euro elections, is euroelections2014.gov.cy, and there
it's a separate website, it's not the Ministry of the Interior.
A separate website, and there we have information in Greek, Turkish and English.
So that's at the
euroelections2014.gov.cy, and somebody who needs more information can visit this site, and I think we have a lot of information in this site.
Can they register online?
Registering the electoral roll? No.
So they need to get the information from there and then go before the 2nd of April to
one of the district offices or in the election service here in Ministry of Interior and submit their application.
Fair enough. And when you say by the 2nd of April, the 1st of April, of course, is a holiday, so
yes.
You're saying up until the end of a working day on the 2nd?
Until 5 o'clock in the afternoon.
Of the 2nd of April?
Yes.
Good in the kitchen, driving a car, it's Rosie on the radio.
There was a fascinating article in the Sunday Mail this week about the views of Cypriots on the austerity measures. It was written by Jim Leontiadis, who is the International Dean at the Cyprus International Institute of Management. He's with me now. Jim, you gave some very thought-provoking views in your article, not least the fact that the people who are possibly least hit at the moment by the austerity measures imposed on Cyprus by the Troika are actually the people who are shouting loudest about the little things they are being asked to contribute.
Yes, the article was about nationalized industries, and the burden of the Cyprus crisis has fallen mainly on the private industries. The nationalized industries have been a privileged sector of the Cyprus economy for some time. And as long as everything was going well, people didn't seem to mind much. But now things are not going so well. And the gap between the private sector and the public sector is growing. The nationalized industries have had a bad record in terms of efficiency and productivity in many countries, not just here. Part of that has to do with the fact that unions tend to be very strong in nationalized industries. And the very strength comes partly from the fact that nationalized industries are very closely associated with political parties. There is sort of a symbiotic relationship between the two. The unions help the political parties by swinging votes, and the nationalized industries, of course, provide patronage, and the political parties have access to the public purse.
It's interesting that you also quoted what happened back in the United Kingdom just prior to Margaret Thatcher and the privatisations that took place following those, I think it was called the Winter of Discontent, actually,
yes.
Back then, if I recall correctly. They have not been reversed, and yet people are still screaming very loudly here about the possibility of privatising some of our nationalised utilities.
Well, I think we're just behind the times. In most European countries, privatization has gone far ahead of that in Cyprus, and it will continue to do so. In England, for example, and I just use it as one example, and that is where the Labour government favored unions and nationalized industries. Nationalized industries were part of their government program. They tried it on a massive scale, and it didn't work. The fact that it didn't work was accompanied by union strikes, despite the fact that the unions in the nationalized industries got preferential treatment. When one union received a big wage increase, the other unions felt they had to match it, and there was a series of strikes, one union leapfrogging the other. And as I pointed out in the article, I was at the Manchester Business School at the time. Britain was on a 3-day week because of all this. The power was out, the corridors were dark, the classrooms were dark. People were not able to get to hospitals very often because the hospital workers were on strike. Even the grave diggers in Liverpool went on strike, and people who died were stored in warehouses, in refrigerated warehouses, until they could be buried properly. Trains were on strike, electricity was on strike.
But it did have a huge backlash, didn't it? Because initially, when those privatisations were made, I think the tax-paying public, for the most part, backed them.
Well, that's the point. Eventually, the public realizes who's paying the bill for this. In England, it came with Margaret Thatcher, and the public backed her policies. And in fact, despite all the criticism, continues to back her policies. Her policies of privatization and union legislation have not been reversed.
Which is interesting. Do you think that that holds a possible clue to where we might go in Cyprus? Because it is inevitable, I think, under the Memorandum of Understanding that the privatisations have to take place. Do you think that once they have done, it may be that there will be more privatisations?
Well, I'm not sure that. Certainly it's shameful that we had to have an outside agency force on Cyprus what should have been obvious and is obvious even to the political parties. That is that the nationalized industries are inefficient, they're corrupt, and incompetent, and they do not serve the public. In a private industry, if the unions press for wage and benefits as they have in the nationalized industries, they realize that if they're too successful, the industry goes broke. In the nationalized industries, the politicians simply have access to the public purse. Now, the fact is that in Cyprus, we've actually increased the number of nationalized industries. Keep in mind, we've nationalized something like 19 cooperative banks, and there are 2 new nationalized companies in the petroleum sector. So actually, the nationalized industries are growing, and it suits the political parties that they're growing, which I think is pretty shameful.
What does it hold in terms of the public purse, the fiscal policy, and the whole muddle that we're in economically?
Well, part of the gravitation towards the crisis we're in came from excessive government spending, and certainly nationalized industries had a role in that. Now, the continuation of the preferential treatment does not help our present financial situation. It really undermines it. The Troika knows that, and that's why they're pushing for privatization. As I said, it's a shame that we have outsiders force on us what should be perfectly obvious, that companies like Cyprus Airways, the Electricity Authority, RIC, etc., are simply inefficient and a drain on the public purse in a situation when the public purse can no longer afford it.
Well, that was the International Dean of the Cyprus International Institute of Management, Jim Leontiades, talking there about the effects of austerity. If you've got any comments on any of the topics you hear us discussing on the Cyprus News Digest, well, do please get in touch. You can email cyprusnewsdigest@gmail.com.
Keep up to date with events and news in Cyprus with the Cyprus News Digest. You can stream it live on mycyradio.eu, listen again on the Cyprus Mail website, or download the podcast to your phone or tablet and listen anytime, anywhere.
And still to come, we'll be talking to Amnesty International. We will be talking about Alexander Downer, the UN Special Advisor for Cyprus, stepping down from his post. He held a press conference this morning and will be joined by BirdLife Cyprus to talk about Prince Charles' letter on the issue of bird trapping on the island. Well, you've no doubt seen that the Amnesty International report that's just come out has been scathing about the treatment in Cyprus of migrants. They're being detained when they shouldn't be. In fact, all sorts of things are happening that have been slammed yet again by Amnesty International. Now, Yorgos Cosmopoulos is the campaigner for Greece and Cyprus at Amnesty. I spoke to him a couple of years ago, and I seem to recall, George, that our conversation ended with you saying that you rather hoped that things would be changing. It doesn't look like they have, does it?
Hi, Rosie. Yes, indeed. Last time I was there, I was very hopeful that things would change despite the grim situation we've seen. I'm afraid that this is not the case. During our last visit, we saw that migrants are still being treated as criminals in Cyprus. What I mean is that the authorities seem to pay little attention to the right to freedom when they decide to lock them up for months on end in conditions which are prison-like conditions. It is a prison in all but in name. This new Menoia detention center I visited a couple of weeks ago.
When you went there, what did you find, George? Because you may be pleased to know that the 3 women who were being held there and who were separated from their children while they were held there are set or even have been freed, because there's been a huge fuss about that, both from campaigning groups here and in Parliament.
Yes, I was made aware that this happened, where actually we raised the issue with the authorities also during a private meeting. And I also saw that the NGO and the national NGOs, they raised quite a noise about it, and I was very happy to see them free. The question, though, is if the authorities have undertaken the right steps, have they reviewed their policy to make sure that this doesn't happen again? Of course, it's important for the women to be out. Of course, it's important that they are with their children. The children need them more than everything. And I have to say, I was very puzzled around these cases. I met 2 of them in detention, and I really couldn't understand why they were being detained and what's the reason of depriving a mother who is not convicted for anything, for any criminal charges. How can she be deprived of their young boys? It's really past us, and we do hope that after this outcry, the authorities won't do that again.
Okay, it's also, more importantly perhaps, an absolute disgrace for the children to be deprived of their mother. You know, if you put the boot on the other foot, as it were. You say you spoke to the authorities while you were here. What did they say to you?
Well, the authorities seem to think they are doing everything in the right order, and they think they are doing what they should be doing. But we have to disagree, and I've seen that the minister has replied to our calls. I was happy to hear him say that they do respect and they do look after the human rights of migrants as well. But I have to say that what we see in practice happening is these migrants are actually, the whole policy is designed to squeeze them, to push them to leave the country as fast as possible, and without due process. What we see is that the system is designed to leave them very little choice, pay little attention to the right of freedom, and simply be locked up for months in a facility in Menoia, which I have to say is better in terms of condition, in terms of material condition than the prison I visited last time. But still, that facility there looks a lot like a prison, no matter what the authorities say. So I do want to call on the authorities again to take a closer look, re-examine both their legislation and, most importantly, their practices. We are still talking about humans. We are still talking about people who have not committed any crime. That just the papers are not in the correct order, or some of them have, most of them probably have to leave the country. This doesn't mean they can be treated like criminals. It doesn't mean their children have to be deprived of their parents. It doesn't mean that they have to spend months and months in detention before examining other alternatives. And there are alternatives, but the Cypriot authorities simply refuse to examine them.
Which is very worrying because, as I said at the beginning, we spoke about this, I think it was in 2012, so it's just under 2 years on, and really nothing very much has changed. It seems that we use detention as a first resort, whereas the minister has come back and said it's only a last resort, but I think a lot of people here, having read those comments, were somewhat surprised that he had the nerve to say them.
Yes, I think this has not changed since our last visit in Cyprus. We've seen again and again that the detention of these people is the first resort. As soon as the authorities declare them as irregular migrants, which in their terminology they use the term prohibited, which is quite a negative term. I mean, nobody's a prohibited person, but I understand this is something technical. As soon as they declare them as irregular migrants, they detain them immediately. They just lock them up for months and months in order to execute their deportation. What they should be doing, they should be looking for alternatives that are less restrictive to these people's freedom.
What do other countries do, George?
Well, there are many different models here, and I'm not going to claim that all countries have the best model, but again, you have to look at the reality in every country. What the international law says and what European law says is you first have to look for alternatives. For example, you can tell somebody that they have to remain at a specified or designated residence. They can deposit documents, they can even deposit some money as a bail, you know. You have to take a gradual approach. You cannot just simply detain, jail people before deporting them. We do understand that there might be some cases where people fail to cooperate, and then you might have to go further and further and reach up to the point where you have to detain them. But what we see in Cyprus is that these people are being detained automatically. They're just being presumed as being in risk of absconding. They're just being presumed as being someone who has to be locked up. And let me be frank here. The reason why this is happening is to make sure that these people go away faster without taking into account what is their private needs, their personal needs, what is their families doing, and what is their basic human rights, the right to liberty.
And of course, we've still got the problem with Syrians being detained when it's sort of internationally recognised that you can't send them back to Syria at the moment. And that too is something we spoke about nearly 2 years ago. George, very depressing for you to come back and see that so little has changed here. What do you do next?
I have to say though that for Syrians explicitly, we are not concerned about the generalized practice of detaining Syrians, but we did see some Syrians detained, which was not clear to us, and it was not evident why these people should be detained. But we don't have a generalized concern, but there are still issues there. So what's next? We're going to write to the authorities again soon. We're going to ask for more explanations. We are open and want to continue this dialogue, but we definitely want to see things changing. And depending on the response, and we will need to conduct some follow-up research. And I can tell you here that we will probably be issuing something again in the near future. We really have to follow this situation closely.
Well, it does seem that following your report, there has been some reaction here and things have moved very slightly. I hope we'll talk again with much better news in the not too distant future, George. Thanks for joining me.
That's my hope as well. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Now, my next guest with me in the studio here on the Cyprus News Digest is Martin Helikar from BirdLife Cyprus, because I'm sure you've read in the Cyprus Mail, and if you're on Facebook, probably seen a lot of comments as well, about the fact that Britain's Prince Charles has sent a letter to the British-based authorities, and I believe also to the President of the Republic, about the barbaric slaughter of birds on the island. It's something I've spoken many times to Martin Helikar about. He's with me. And Martin, is this a welcome intervention? A lot of people seem to think it might certainly make a difference, particularly on the bases, but I think if you look at some of the Facebook comments, there's a little bit of people are upset that he's dared to speak out.
It's a negative reaction to the intervention on the part of Prince Charles. From our point of view, it is a very welcome intervention. I think you're right, Rosie, it'll probably have more of an impact within the British bases, but unfortunately a lot of the problem with trapping is within the British bases, so that is good. We do need some impact, we need some more action from the UK government to do something about areas like Cape Pila, where the netting for birds is really out of control, or really is at a very, very large industrial scale, I would say. Of course, as Cyprus, we don't like outsiders complaining about what's going on in Cyprus. That's natural. But I would always say, if we don't want people to criticise what we're doing, then we need to get to the root of the problem, and we need to start really getting hard and hitting hard against the trapping and beginning to make inroads on a problem that has, unfortunately, as we've discussed many times before, has been increasing over recent years rather than decreasing.
Well, that is the problem, isn't it? Because I seem to recall several years ago you were quite upbeat about the fact that you thought the war was being won slowly but surely. What, in particular, with regard to the British bases, who have always been, they operate sort of separately, don't they? They have always, I thought, operated a much stricter policy on this. And a couple of years ago, I believe you even said they had a zero-tolerance policy. What's happened? What's changed there?
It's an interesting question, and it is the question, isn't it? The British bases, the policing there is distinct from the policing in the Republic, as you point out, and there does seem to be a very particular problem, especially with misnetting, which is unfortunately the far more effective way to catch and slaughter birds within the bases. Now, the bases would always point to the market being in the Republic, in the restaurants selling the birds being in the Republic, fair enough, but there is a really industrial scale trapping operation going on, especially on Cape Pila. We've got a whole area there that has been devoted, it is being managed, has been planted up with alien acacia to create ideal trapping habitat. Why is that being allowed to continue? We're talking about an area that is, after all, a training ground for the British military. It's where the squaddies go before they go to Afghanistan.
Right.
And I think, unfortunately, part of the answer, at least, is that there's always been a bit of a policy within the British bases to turn a blind eye to what, with big inverted commas, might be called the natives, and what they're doing in terms of breaking the law, so that they don't react to the presence of the British bases. And behind the scenes, is something that unfortunately people will admit. Well, in this case, we need to, as in every other case, but in this case, from my point of view in particular, it's unacceptable. It's something that the British public, the British tax-paying public, feel very strongly about. So in that sense, we're really glad that someone like Prince Charles, high profile, has put this front and centre in the British media. And we're hoping that this will bring a reaction from Britain, and we're hoping that this will force an increased reaction from the British-based authorities. I'm not saying they do nothing, I'm not. And, full respect, hats off to the British the British police officers within the bases who are doing what they can on very limited resources. We need to throw more resources about this. We need to think outside the box. We need to think not just about policing, but about, for example, getting rid of the acacia.
I was going to ask you about that, because one of the things I think that was suggested in the letter was exactly that, uproot the acacia. Now, if that was done, Martin, would it solve the problem? Because they wouldn't have anywhere to hang the misfits.
It would solve a huge part of the problem. If you remove the facilities, as it were, for people to trap, then, it doesn't become the number one spot for trapping in Cyprus. It becomes much harder. And you can do it. Because even if you just remove the irrigation pipes, because the acacia bushes there have been used to a nice bit of watering, they're not tolerant of drought at all. So what we need is to cut out the irrigation pipes. It's all unlicensed, illegal irrigation. You can irrigate legally for your potato crops there, but not for the acacia. So let's get rid of that. Let's move on and take out the acacia. It needs a big operation. It needs an investment. This could actually be the equivalent of a Natura site for its floristic value, for the wonderful wildflowers that do remain on Cape Pila despite the acacia. So let's attack it from that angle also. And yes, there does need to be action, of course, from the Republic on the restaurants. No question. This is a very intractable, a very chronic, a very difficult problem. It needs to be hit from every angle. We're not saying it's up to this person or that person. We all need to play our part, including BirdLife Cyprus and other NGOs, and we're ready, willing and hopefully able to do that. We need to change hearts and minds on this. We need to stop people buying these birds, stop people buying Ampelopolia. Have risen to market, and that's another thing that can have a huge impact. But if we're talking about the basis right now, and what Prince Charles has said, I haven't seen the letter, but from what I've seen in the papers, also he does talk about Cape Pila and the acacias, and that's very welcome. Let's hit that. That's something that can be done, and something that could be done ahead of the autumn season, which is the big upcoming slaughter.
What's your reaction to, as I answered at the beginning some of the negative comments that this has aroused. Is the British interfering in Cyprus again?
Well, it's the same whole thing, and the kind of comments that we always get as Birdlife Cyprus when we try and bring this issue to the fore again and ask for action. We're often accused of giving Cyprus a bad name. Well, my answer is very simple. It's the trappers who are giving Cyprus a bad name, and ignoring a problem is never an answer. Of course, it's not nice to have bad publicity on things, especially at these times when Cyprus is having a hard time overall. But the answer is simply to do something about it, to do something effective about it. And it is, to a large extent, in the hands of the public, in the sense that it is a consumer-led problem. So let's see some action on it. Let's see some consumers speaking out against trapping, against the purchase and the consumption of umbrella bullion, and then we will get some positive media coverage. Cyprus, for example, could be a fantastic destination for birdwatching tourism. Could be the destination in the Mediterranean.
Oh my goodness me, we've got an awful long way to go before we will persuade bird watchers that this is the place to come.
But I think, we do have a huge problem with trapping, is a huge problem in that context. But if we begin to do something about it, then we can get some positive stories out there. Like we were getting a handle of this a few years back, unfortunately, and now we've really gone back, which is always very disappointing.
Well, I'm sure we will talk again. We say that every time we do talk, Martin. I hope that BirdLife manages to get some action on this with a little bit of royal help or without. And thank you very much indeed for joining us. Martin Helikar from BirdLife Cyprus talking to us on the Cyprus News Digest. One more topic to come, and that is Alexander Downer stepping down as the UN Special Advisor on Cyprus.
Online at mycyradio.eu and as a podcast with the Cyprus Mail. This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
Well, there was a press conference this morning at which the UN Special Advisor on Cyprus, Alexander Downer, bid farewell to the island. This is what he had to say.
The past 5 years for me have been truly memorable times. It's been a very intense, professional and personal experience, and I've very much enjoyed my time in Cyprus. I couldn't overstate that. I have very much enjoyed it. It's a lovely place. I've made many friends and established an excellent dialogue with a variety of interlocutors, Greek Cypriot and Turkish Cypriot alike. I particularly appreciated the commitment of the political leaders of both communities to finding a comprehensive settlement, and the United Nations, above all, does appreciate their commitment. And I believe that the leaders, both former and the current ones, have demonstrated that commitment time and again. And it's required substantial courage on their parts politically, and I think the leaders I've dealt with while I've been here have demonstrated that courage. I'm personally thankful for the cooperation that the leaders, the negotiating teams, the members of technical committees and all those involved in the peace process have extended to me in the course of my tenure. I'd like to recognise also the positive role that has been played by civil society and its engagement in support of the peace process. I'd also like to note the support I've received from the diplomatic community, as well as the support they've extended to the process in general. Looking at the current state of play in the talks, the conclusion of the joint declaration on the 11th of February, welcome as that was, also marked the official resumption of full-fledged negotiations. And since then, the sides have held regular meetings to discuss a variety of issues. The process, I think, is in good shape. There's a positive momentum, and I think that the leaders will be able to build on this, including at their next meeting, which is on the 31st of March. Contributing to the efforts to find a solution to the Cyprus problem has been incredibly interesting for me. It's been a great honour to have done the job, but in any case, I just want to emphasise what a great honour it's been, how I've developed a huge affection for Cyprus, and it will always have a very special place in my heart. I hope very much that this round of talks is building on many previous efforts, is going eventually to lead to the reunification of Cyprus as a bizonal, bicommunal federation. I know it's difficult. I know that as well as anybody knows that. It is a hugely difficult task. But people shouldn't despair, and people shouldn't be defeatist about it. I think difficult as it is, I think this agreement can be made. And I think the two leaders you have now are people who can do this. I think they have the courage, they have the commitment, and they have the strength to be able to do it. And my sense of the public in Cyprus is that the public are urging them on to reach this agreement. So I wish everybody involved, the two leaders, Mr. Anastasiadis and Dr. Erolu, I wish them, their negotiating teams, all the best for the future, and I shall be watching from not too far away very closely what's happening, and I'm sure from time to time we'll come back here to catch up with old friends and just keep in touch with what's going on. Thanks very much.
Taking questions from the floor, the Cyprus Mail put to Mr. Downer that after 5 years it was mission unaccomplished, and asked what had gone wrong.
Well, I don't think things have gone wrong. I think I look back on the 5.5 years, I think it's been, for everybody, I think it's been hard work, but I think on the whole it's been pretty successful in building a framework for what eventually can be an agreement here. So this is an ongoing process. I mean, I think I'm right in saying there have been 24 special advisors and special representatives for Cyprus, and, you know, by definition, over 40 years, during the tenure of none of them has there been a final agreement reached. So in that respect, I suppose I'm just one in a long line. It's not about individuals, really, the explanation for why it's so hard to reach an agreement. It's about the circumstances of Cyprus. The circumstances are such, the history is such, that to build the trust between the two communities, and of course the leaders of the two communities, to work together, to run a federal government together, to create it, to run it together, is hard. And then on top of that, there are a lot of very difficult and complex issues. For example, solving the problem of property, that will be a combination of politically sensitive and expensive. So it's very, very difficult to do. Issues like territorial adjustment, of course there will be substantial territorial adjustment in a Cyprus solution. Territorial adjustment, though, is also, particularly on the Turkish Cypriot side, a very sensitive issue, and on the Greek Cypriot side, a very important issue. There are the treaties, you know, what to do about the treaties, particularly the Treaty of Guarantee. Different sides have different views about that, which are a function of their different histories, or their, if you might call it a common history, but their historical experiences. So the reason that so far the Cyprus problem has not been solved in over 40 years, including, of course, in my time, it's true, but the reason for that is the complexity of the issue and the political sensitivity of the issue. I always say, with international disputes, ultimately these are about politics, and the domestic politics here, Greek Cypriot politics and Turkish Cypriot politics, are such that the leaders, whoever they are, including the present leaders, have to navigate through that difficult political environment.
During his tenure in Cyprus, Mr. Downer has very often had negative media coverage. He was asked whether or not he could have improved his relationship with the media on the island.
Some people in politics, and I suppose this is a job in politics, are very, very, I mean, here, I hope you don't mind me saying this, because you want me to be frank, are really, really interested in getting a good run in the media. For me, I haven't actually spoken to the media very often. Some of you will say to me, when did you last have a press conference like this? I don't think it's a role that lends itself to engaging hugely with the media. And when I have, obviously things are brought to my attention, criticism of me, some sort of fantastic stories made up about things I'm supposed to have said or done or thought or whatever. Some of them are, you know, the literal meaning of the word fantastic, as in fantasy. if I were in politics here, I would deal with those sorts of issues, but I don't need to. So the important thing for me is to be working with the leaders, working with the representatives, the two teams, because there are other players in the two teams, and helping work through ideas and transmitting ideas between the two, not becoming a media star. And if I wanted to work through the media, and if I thought having a superb profile in the media was what this was about, well, then I would have worked on that. But basically, I have left that alone, and people are entitled to say whatever they like in a free society, and this is a free, in that respect, in terms of public expression, this is a free place, and people say what they like, and whether I like it or not, it's. I think the best advice I'd give to anybody who might succeed me in this position is everyone who has done it before has been given a terrible hammering in the media here. And when I came here, I was told, look, if you really feel very sensitive about being criticised in the media, this is not the job for you. And I said, well, no, I'm not too sensitive about that. I'm very used to praise and insults, having been a senior public figure in Australia for a long, long time. And that turned out to be, even before I arrived here, there were attacks on me because, I had met somebody who knew somebody who was a Greek or a Turk or something, and this showed how hugely biased one way or the other I really was. I just sort of looked at this with wry amusement. But look, it's just, I haven't focused hugely on it.
Having expressed his optimism about the negotiations, the UN Special Advisor was then asked what made it different this time.
Well, in every year the circumstances are different. I'd say two things about this. By the way, in principle, because it's 40 years, these negotiations have still not produced a solution, and you can go back further than that, and many do. And I explained why I think it's, in a very broad sense, why it's very difficult to achieve a solution, but I believe not impossible. I think at the beginning of the Christofias Talat period, there was understandable optimism there. I used to say at that time that I was cautiously optimistic, and I think I said it on a number of occasions. And, it sort of moved ahead more slowly, but not badly. For a while. Then, of course, there was a change of leadership on the Turkish Cypriot side, so that involves a certain resetting of the process, and then as time went on, it's kind of slowed down, frankly. I think the circumstances, though, are different now, in that I think the focus on the tough economic times helps people in the public, because these issues are ultimately about politics, domestic politics, helps the public to understand more clearly the benefits that would flow to Cyprus from reunification according to relevant Security Council resolutions. So I think people can understand that and have a higher degree of focus on that. I think people are thinking, gosh, 40 years, still no solution, but no rejection of attempts to achieve a solution, by the way. And the public are thinking, with the economic crisis, and, tough economic times for Turkish Cypriots as well, but particularly for the Greek Cypriots, the economic crisis, you've seen GDP decline quite sharply, you've seen a big rise in unemployment. In circumstances like that, I think reunification becomes all the more appealing. People can do the maths. They can see if Cyprus were to reunify, it would have the potential to lead to substantial increases in investment in the island, could give it a huge boost as a tourism destination, and of course the economic relationship with Turkey, Cyprus being in the European Union but next to Turkey, is something that Cypriots, be they Turkish Cypriots or Greek Cypriots, and of course Turkish Cypriots can speak the language, could make the most of. So I think the economic circumstances, tough as they are for everybody and sympathetic as I personally am to them, in these difficult times, nevertheless can and have reminded people that reunification, that a solution, as people like to say, a solution to the Cyprus problem would be beneficial to the whole island. The status quo is not only is it politically unsatisfactory, but it's not the best solution economically either.
Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.